But let's dive into the Inferno then. Let's dive into the Inferno. There's lots to talk about here. So we have with the Inferno this whole. I only gave you guys the first third, and then the last part. I gave you guys the last part because I wanted you to see how the devil was depicted in it. Right, Judas, the devil, Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. Right, those are the four people in the last part. But I didn't give you the whole thing because it does get kind of repetitive after a while, right? They go to a different part, they see different sins and how they're punished. If you like read the whole thing's in our book. But I only gave you the first third and the last part just to save you some time. I feel like you could get the gist with what I gave you. But we see Dante's hell. Dante, if you guys actually read through the Bible, hell was actually not described much. Neither is the devil, really. You can kind of count on two hands how many times the idea of hell is actually mentioned, even in the New Testament. It's not mentioned much. So Dante kind of did this very imaginative task of imagining like what hell was actually like. So he divides it up in all these different circles. Basically, what happens in it, they thought the world was flat then. Right? They didn't have a conception that the world was round, the spherical. So basically, in this thing, Dante starts at the equator. Then by the time the whole thing ends, he kind of ends up in the poles. I mean, so in his journey through hell, he takes a journey around Earth at the same time. So if you guys notice at the very end, he's running on Satan. Right, he goes out on the completely opposite end of the world. Right, so the whole geography, the whole idea of Dante's geography of hell is really, really cool. Basically, we have descending layers of hell, right? The further down you go, the worse things get. Right? And he actually ranked. I mean, he kind of like ranks the sins, like which sin is worse the further down you go. So the list may surprise some of you. You guys probably have I'm looking at a different version of their book. You guys probably have like a little map right before it starts. Let me see here. Got a book here. I have it in the one I'm using. Let's see if you guys got the map. Yeah, you do. You got the same map. It's on page 928. 928. On 928, you kind of see the map of like the different types of sins and which ones are worse than others. So you start out, circle 1 is the virtuous pagans. So I'm definitely will be interested to hear what you guys have to say about this. The virtuous pagans are the people who lived before Jesus. So even it doesn't matter how good of a person they were, and if you lived before Jesus, you're in hell, right? You're in this first part reserved for the virtuous pagans. We'll kind of break them all down as we go. Circle 2, you got the lustful people. Right? Dido is in circle 2, right, from last week. The gluttons, circle 4 is for the prodigal and miserly. So the people that don't want to spend any money, right? The people who want to hoard their wealth, right? The misers. Circle 5 for wrath. 6, arch heretics. 7 is for the violent people. So the violent people against their neighbors, the people who kill themselves. Violence against God. Circle 8, it's even worse than violence. These are for the panderers and seducers, the flatterers, the simonists. I think this is about as far down as, I don't think we made it this far down. Yeah, I think I told you guys to read Canto 1 through 11. The Simonists are money lenders, right? They're money lenders. They're people that give you money give you an interest rate. And I'll definitely go into them a little bit because that's an important thing we'll have to wrap our mind around. But then you got soothsayers, grafters, hypocrites, thieves, deceivers, sowers of discord, falsifiers. And then the last part of hell is for the people who are treacherous. So you have people who are treacherous against their families, to the people who betray their country, people who betray guests, the treacherous to their benefactors. So the last part of hell is for the most treacherous people in history. Right? So you got the devil, right, who betrayed God. You got Judas Iscariot, who sold Christ out for the silver. And you got Brutus and Cassius, right, who sold Julius Caesar out. Right, they led the whole murder plot against Julius Caesar. Dante really loved Julius Caesar, right, to kind of put those two guys in with Judas Iscariot and the devil, right? So yeah, this list may surprise you, right? Violence is kind of in the middle. Panders and seducers and money lenders and all those types, they're below violence, which is interesting. So he's got this whole geography of hell, right? Depending, it's almost his rank, his own idea of ranking, like what sin's worse than the other. The whole thing, we get these elaborate punishments for these different types of sinners. So let's dive into you guys talking now. What did you guys make of this thing? What was your reading experience with it like?
My favorite thing was probably like how every layer of hell they entered into, there was like this like kind of like guardian of that ring, and the guardian would come up and kind of just like threaten them or try to scare them, and Virgil would just literally just like move aside, like get out of my way. We're on a mission from God. So I thought that was pretty cool. I thought it was kind of funny.
Right. Yeah, you get these different demons and whatnot who are like, you can't go any further. Virgil one time's like, call God, right? He'll send an angel down, he'll fix this. We just gotta wait a few minutes, right?
I think like my favorite like imagery in the story was probably like when it was describing the Furies in the city of Dis and how they like were like clawing at themselves and stuff, or like how it just like how you said before, like how it described like the devil and how he had like three heads. I thought that was pretty cool.
Right, three heads and mockery of the Holy Trinity, right? What did the rest of you guys think? What do you find interesting about it?
I probably studied this the first time before most of you all were born. We did it in high school, and we did a total one semester on this, and it broke it down in every category. What always got me is I can kind of see it more now and rereading it, that Dante hated the Greeks. Him being, like she said earlier, he was Italian, Roman, so it made more sense that all the people that he hated were there. That they, everybody that he talked about was being punished by whatever specific thing that he, knew about them. And I don't know. That's something that I focused on a lot about was once you start breaking down the characters, and then it's kind of funny too how when it starts, this is just stuff that I reflected on that I can remember from almost 30 years ago. Was his everything now was about Christianity. And at the beginning, when he was trying to climb the hill, it, represented heaven. And then him being, his weakness and his, I can't remember what the word they used was, but it was kind of his, where he's been void of God for so long that made him want to get more acquainted with him. And then I think Virgil was just his favorite that he wanted to do something with. So that's the way it was written. It's really deep, and I enjoyed it. It's something, if you get to, we studied it probably way more than we should have back in my day, but I enjoyed rereading it again. And there's a lot of stuff that can be taken out of all of it.
It's cool that you dove into that in high school, though. That's one that you don't hear about people reading today in high school. That's cool that you read through it.
I think it's crazy how instead of like now, I guess we believe, sin is sin. You go one place, there is no circle, but how he broke each sin up and put it at a different level. I thought was funny was when they were in the pool of lava or whatever, and how one escaped, and then the demons like blamed him for them escaping, and then they end up getting it back. That was funny.
Right, you're right to point that out, Sean, again, right? With Protestants, sin, right? It doesn't matter if it's murder or if it's I'm telling a lie, right? All sin's the same, right? So you're right to point out that he ranks them, which is different than what we're used to.
I know for me, I could probably even reread this and probably, still, like Nathan said, still get more out of it than what I read, the first time to get it, because there's so much, when you read over it, there's so much, even when you go back, like when I watched like the clip that you would put on there was some things, that was in that. And then I was going back, like rereading or going over some more things that was in here. But, even, to break it down, because, that is true. We look at, sin is sin. It doesn't matter if it's a little white lie or if it's something as bad as murder, but how it's broken down here, and, how some of the ones, I guess, where they are, broken down, how one is portrayed as worse than the other, as far as, how they're broken down. And then you get all the way down to the end. But yeah, I thought that it was, I don't know, it was different reading it, but, to read it at the same time, and, as a Christian and reading it, it was, because the way that I kind of look at everything, sin is sin. It doesn't matter if it's, just, different things, like that. It's just sin is sin. There's, hell is hell and sin is sin. But to look at it and how it's broken down here, and like the different types of punishments, I'm sure we'll go into like, all of those, but, just reading, I guess like the different circles and what the punishments were. And some of them, it was, I don't know, it was a different read for sure.
Do you think that maybe like it's how Nathan said he like put the Greeks in each layer of hell because he hated the Greeks? Do you think that maybe he placed like frauds under violent people because maybe like he had some kind of personal vendetta against people who like did like fraudulent acts, like since he like threw the Greeks in there kind of for that reason? Do you think maybe it was like some kind of personal vendetta he had against like each certain set of people?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on Dante by any means, but I do know like he had a lot of problems with different church officials then. Right, so that's why there's a lot of like popes and stuff in different circles. He was actually exiled from Florence. He was from Florence. He ran his mouth so much, and this thing got him in so much trouble that he is actually exiled from his home. He had to leave his home or be killed. So yeah, the fraud and the hypocrites, hypocrisy, as you guys just noticed, is way down there, even below violence. All right, so you could tell that that's like this thing rubbed in the wrong way. The book tries to give you some good notes on like who's who, and Like, is this someone who was living when Dante was living, stuff like that. So to answer your question there.
Yeah, I really liked how he gave us his version of hell. It's definitely different from what I think of like how hell is. And after reading it, it's like he's walking us through a journey of hell. And then I liked how he described the devil as like a big frozen beast. And I think of the devil as like he's on fire. So it's different, but I really liked it. I enjoyed this read.
Yeah, the devil's flaps his wings so much, right? That creates this Arctic air that freezes him in place, right? So that's actually pretty cool. You think of hell as a lake of fire, right? You don't think about any part of it being ice cold.
Yeah, so that was very different from what we like picture. So I like that.
I read a lot of the end notes, and like there's like a lot of references or like allusions that you wouldn't like think of or know about unless you read the end notes. But I liked how like towards, I can't remember exactly where, but some kind of bridge or path had crumbled, and I went and read the end note, and it was like it's referencing to this cliff that crumbled after the earthquake of the like that occurred after the crucifixion of Christ. I thought that was just really cool that he just like kind of put that much detail in it.
Right. Yeah, you could tell the guy was well read and well adept. As Nathan said, he does seem to have kind of a thing against the Greeks here, as well. Like, notice how the Trojans aren't punished that much, like the Greeks are, right? So I'm definitely interested to dive into all that. Very well read. He knows his religion. He knows his Christianity. He knows the classics. Right? So it's such an incredible feat of imagination. I think, like this whole thing. Like, that's why it's still read and popular today. Very, very much a feat of imagination. Even coming up with all these different punishments and stuff.
I felt like I was like witnessing him like writing in a dream journal the whole time. Like this was something that he just had a dream about one night and just wrote it all down. That's kind of that's kind of the vibe that I got off of it. Probably, I mean, of course, like I don't know, but that just kind of that's what it put me in the mind of. It's just like some big long nightmare or dream that he had, and he, that kind of like a prophetic dream, kind of.
Right. Yeah, I failed to mention, that's a good point. Like Virgil's his guide to the dream, right? I failed to mention at the beginning that the Inferno is only the first part of this story. Like, he goes through hell, then he goes through purgatory, and then he goes to then he actually gets a tour through heaven too. So that's the whole Divine Comedy. You don't ever read the part about him going to heaven in classes like this, right? Because that's an interesting question in itself. Why do we talk about his hell and not his heaven in a class like this today, right? But Beatrice, his lover, like his beloved, right? She gives him the tour through heaven. Because Virgil gives him the tour through hell and purgatory. So.
I thought it was weird that, like, he's a poet, but he placed so many poets in hell, like alongside him, Virgil and Homer and Aristotle. And he had all those like guys in hell alongside him. So like could you like say that maybe like, I don't know, you could say like he's like a brooding artist in a way, like he just maybe kind of hates himself.
What do the rest of you guys think of that question? That's a good question. And I'll deflect it and see what you guys think about that. You know, is this guy a brooding artist? Right? If you had to compare Dante, to extend that question, if you had to compare Dante to a writer today, who would you compare him to? Somebody said Stephen King in class last night. Right?
I'd say Quentin Tarantino or something. He's not a writer, but you know what I mean, or a Rob Zombie type of thing or something. This story is just how he, if you could sit back and write what you would feel, what you would want, you know, whoever, he loved Virgil, so he had Virgil on a tour. And then, you know, at the same time Christianity started, it states at the first of it, I believe it was like, you know, Beatrice did this, but he also had prayers from the Virgin Mary and some other, I took a bunch of notes. It's like Saint Lucia and Rachel and stuff that he, you know, it's like it's his story, like to the utmost degree. Like the saints are praying for me, and I've got my role model Virgil taking me through, and you know, and like she said earlier, like, you know, with the magicians and sorcery and stuff, and like she said, being a poet, they might feel that, you know, they're not along the same lines of Christianity and stuff, and maybe that's where he put them. Just my
you could probably also make the argument that, like, where most of the poets he listed were, like, you know, the ancient Greek greats, that maybe he saw them, like, he knew that they didn't have Christianity, so that's why he put them in hell, because he knew that they, like, more so maybe worship I mean, I don't know when each of the Greek poets that he mentioned were born, or if what they like practice religion wise, but maybe he knew that, because he mentioned that, you know, they were like unbaptized or something. I can't even remember, but maybe that's why he placed them in hell, because he knew that that's where they belong. But, you know, like Nathan said, they were his favorites. So I don't know. There's like a couple of different things you could say.
This is a good chance to segue over into the first circle, which is the virtuous pagans. Right. So the virtuous pagans, this is an interesting theological debate. But the virtuous pagans are the people who lived nice, honorable lives before the birth of Jesus. Right. So they just happen to be unlucky. Right. They happen to live before Jesus came and redeemed mankind for its sins. These are the people who live the best possible life you could. Good people. They just happen to live at the wrong time. So he says here, Virgil's in this section, right? He gets a ticket out to give Dante a tour, right? But this is where Virgil lived. He said their great worth alone was not enough, for they did not know baptism, which is the gateway to the faith you follow. And if they came before the birth of Christ, they did not worship God the way one should. Virgil says, I myself am a member of this group. This defect and for no other guilt we here are lost. In this alone we suffer, cut off from hope, we live on in desire. Basically, this first part is just like living on earth. Right? They're not punished any other way, except it's almost just the same as living on earth. Right? They have desires. Maybe they live life just like they would here. So they get around, sit around, talk about philosophy or whatever. Right? But the way that it's a punishment is God's grace, God's love, and does not extend into there, because they didn't know God when they were living. So how are they going to know God now? Right? So they just happen to live the wrong time, right? So they're in this part of hell. It's hell, but not really at the same time, right? It's just like living on earth. They just don't know the grace and the love of God, I guess you could say. We find out there's lots of our characters that we studied in this part. Homer's here, the poet Homer. I guess we said that this Homer actually a real guy, but he is here, right? We have Hector, right? We have Aeneas. We have Socrates and Plato. Right? We talked to the first week about how Socrates, how he's almost a Christ-like figure in his own way, right? With his sacrifice and all this stuff, right? We talked about that week 1. Saladin, who led the Muslims, right, in the Crusades, he's here, which is interesting. Yeah, all these other philosophers besides Socrates, Horace and Ovid and Lucian, all these Romans. Notice, right? Those are all Roman writers, right? But they're here. What do you guys think about this idea of they just so happen not to know like the Hebrew God before Christ came, so they're stuck here? What do you guys think of that idea? Before I set you loose, I want to preface this part with this. You guys probably all know the story about the harrowing of hell. Supposedly before, in the middle of the crucifixion, like on the Saturday between the crucifixion and Easter, right? Supposedly the story is Jesus went down to hell and broke a lot of like the Old Testament guys out. So he broke like Moses out, Noah, like Elijah, Elisha, right? All the great Old Testament, King David, all the great Old Testament people. So supposedly as the story is, he broke them out of heaven, or broke them out of hell and took them up to heaven during those 2 days. Have you guys ever heard that story before in church and stuff? Nathan, you're saying you have?
I haven't, I don't think.
Yeah.
I have, yeah, many years ago, but I can remember what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I know I had, because I remember I was like in a church play as a kid, and we actually did that part in the play. But yeah, that's an interesting story. That story is actually not in the Bible, right? That's a story a lot of people take for granted as being doctrine, but it's actually not in there. They cut that out. So, fun fact for you. But they take that story as for granted here. So notice how you don't have Moses or Noah or King David or anybody here, right? Because they actually interacted with the Hebrew God the Father, right? So that's why they're not here. Jesus already broke them out. But everybody else here is stuck here, right? So what do you guys think of this? They didn't know God. They didn't even know about it, right? So they're stuck in hell. What do you guys think about this idea?
I kind of think it's like not fair, since especially if they were living a good life and they didn't know him, I don't think they should go to hell. I think it's kind of like how when a baby's born, it doesn't know like sin or, to do the right thing. So in my head, I feel like they should automatically go to heaven because they don't know right from wrong. And that's how I feel like for them too.
Right. Yeah, just personally, I agree with what you said, Machine. It doesn't seem right? They were ignorant, right?
Well, and that's like when we we go to church and we read the Bible, and then we study and we pray, and there's all these things, and once we get to like a certain age, to know, like, we know the difference and we know what's right and wrong. But the reason that we know the difference is because we've kind of been taught that, or what I mean, we figure out what's right or wrong, or something like that. So I feel like that it's not necessarily fair, because they don't know. How do you know what's the right thing to choose if you've never been taught what's right and what's wrong, if you've never been taught to know?
Now, what other thoughts here? Do remember that even though they're not in hell, they live life like it's here, right? So is that so awful? I guess we could say.
Well, and considering the circumstance, I guess to be here, I guess the best out of the whole situation, what was the best thing for them? It would be, that particular circle. It would be that particular, because there's probably a lot of people that would say, here, even if they're, they don't go to church or, whatever religion that they practice, they would say, that their life's comfortable here, that they're happy here, that they're, that they live here on earth and they have a good life. So, when you kind of look at it that way, a lot of people would say that they're, they're happy and they're comfortable here. They don't really have very many hardships and they don't really go through, very many things and stuff like that for whatever reasons. But yeah, so according to all the different circles that they could be in, they had to be in a circle. So what was the absolute best circle for them to be in for that situation? So considering what they had to be in, I mean, that would have been the best for them.
Other thoughts on this one before we move on? Yeah, it's an interesting theological question. I mean, even today, if you think about people who live in different parts of the world where Christianity is not the mainstream, right? Let's say you live in Saudi Arabia, right, which is an extreme Islamic country, right? Well, you can be put to death there for like even trying to worship Christianity, right? So like, are all those people sentenced to hell, right? Just because they happen to live in a place where they don't even get access to that information, right? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, that's things I've wondered about too in different countries. Like, I wonder if he'll take that in consideration too. I believe he will because they don't know. But I've always wondered that.
Right? If you're studying, for those of you who study stuff like Hinduism, right? Hinduism actually believes that like all religions can even be kind of sucked into theirs, right? So like Vishnu is a manifestation of Brahman on earth, right? So every instance of world religions, so like Christ is just another time where God manifested on earth, right? So if you try to convert a Hindu over to Christianity, they're like, oh yeah, we really believe the same thing, right? So
I kind of agree that like a lot of religions are the same. I mean, even before my religion class and stuff, like Hinduism is like the oldest known and recorded religion, like historically and stuff. So, like, I mean, if you look at, you know, it not to get like too into religion, but if you look at like Islam and Christianity, like there's a lot of similarities between the two religions. So, like, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's the same religion because, they all go by different like theological texts, but I mean, I think there's like a little bit, I don't know, I think there's a little bit of leeway there. Like you can't really say, I mean, I don't know. I'm not like super religious or anything. So like I have a different opinion than like some people.
right. So you've read a bunch of them, right? So you see a lot of the similarities, right? Yeah, deep questions for a Friday evening here, right? So well, let's talk about some of the more concrete areas now then, right? Just note here that Hector is in this part of hell, right? He's virtuous, he's a good guy. When we get to circle the next circle, that's for the lustful. Right. So we have here Dido from last week, right, who killed, remember she killed herself because Aeneas leaves her, right? The free bird reference I made last week, right? You guys all remember. So Dido is here, but also Achilles is here. Achilles is here as well. So Achilles is seen as being super lustful. I think the footnote gives the description that the Middle Ages, there was lots of anti-Achilles texts that sprang up. My version said the medieval version of the Troy story described Achilles as enamored of a Trojan princess, Polyxena, and killed in an ambush set by Paris when he went to meet her. Helen's seduction by Paris was the cause of the Trojan War. So they saw Achilles as a man controlled by his carnal desires, his lusts. Right. So that's actually outside the Iliad, right? That's another story. Achilles is punished here as being super lustful.
Didn't we read about, didn't we read about Achilles also possibly like having a male lover too?
Yeah.
Was that Achilles? Do you think that maybe that could also have something to do with it?
Very possibly, right? As Nathan said, Dante didn't really like the values of the Greeks, right? And that was something that's always been widely known that the ancient Greeks were accepting of, right? So I think that's definitely, homosexuals are punished in a later part of hell, as we will find out in a minute. Right? They're not in the lust section. They're in their own section later on. But they are punished. Yeah, they're punished by sweeping winds, right? That like the winds are so bad there, right? That it's almost like the winds of desire, right? They're punished by like tornado like conditions all the time in the lust section. Right. So
if I remember correctly, ain't Paris there too with Achilles?
yeah, Paris is here as well, right? And was it Paris's fault even, right? That he, because the goddesses who played the trick on him, right? Pick which one of us you think's, the best one. And he picks Aphrodite, right? So she gives him Helen. So you can raise the question, right? Did Paris even do anything wrong in to begin with? Right. But he's put in the lust section too, right?
Was it on this Ring of Hell when he I think he called upon Dido and asked her to tell like her story or something, and like he kind of, I think it said he like swooned. Was it this Ring of Hell?
No, there's only a brief mention of Dido here, I think. He sees her and then he sees Cleopatra right after. Cleopatra.
There was like one Ring of Hell where he called upon someone, I can't remember who it was, and like he swoons, and it's like almost like he kind of just like, because they were telling some story of like betrayal or something, I don't even know, but like I thought like maybe he like felt like even though he hated the Greeks, he like kind of had sympathy for them in a way. I'm probably wrong though. I'm not for sure. Like I don't have my books online. I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, you would have to point me to the section to take a close look at that. I didn't. Did you read through the whole thing? Some people I know have read through the whole thing. So some people are actually a little more refreshed on it than me because I only reread the parts I assigned. A lot of the stuff in the middle I'm not fresh on because it's been a little while. So I had a couple students last night who read the whole thing. They were saying stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. But it's interesting. Lust isn't that bad a sin, right? It's really the least offensive sin according to Dante, right? Which is interesting. Why is Dido put here instead of in the suicide section, for instance? Right? She kills herself, so why isn't she down in the suicide section? Right? Maybe because maybe go back to what Nathan said, right? Virgil loved the Romans, right? So that might be it. I don't know. Why did he put her here instead of there? So any other thoughts on the lust section? You got the rest of you guys think lust is the least offensive of all these sins?
I definitely think lust should definitely maybe come after gluttony. I mean,
Yeah. Now,
being lustful
is not as bad as overeating, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the gluttons are punished pretty hardcore here, right? They kind of have to like roll in their own, like they pretty much have to like roll in their own filth, right? That's how they're punished. The gluttons and the slothful, right? Both of them are punished in a similar way. If you're lazy, next time you sleep past your alarm clock, remember how Dante punishes the slothful, right? You have to pretty much roll in your own muck for all of eternity. Right. So next time you sleep past your alarm, just remember that. So you better not get to this better not hit snooze next time. Just saying. Right. But the slothful and the gluttons, right? They're kind of put. Gluttony was one of those dangerous sins in the Middle Ages, right? Gluttony was a sin. It was definitely a defect of moral character. Sean is right to point out is it's lust worse than that, right? So seems interesting.
I think it's weird that gluttony was seen so bad in the Middle Ages, but as you get further on in history, you see that the people that are richer use their size to see how much richer they are than the poor.
Right. Yeah, it was around this time period. You're right, Lauren. In this time period, like especially with women, like heavier set women in this time period were seen as like sexual icons, right? You know, these were the hot chicks, right? The heavier set women. Right? Why is that? It's a sign they had enough money to eat. Right. So the values in that time period about beauty and aesthetics, right? They were widely different than they are today. We'll see a character like that next week with the wife of Bath. Right? You'll see that she's a heavier set woman. She's got a gap in between her two front teeth, right? Those types of things would have been hot back then because it's a sign of wealth. So, it's a fun thought, right? It's a fun thought how much things have changed. What do you guys think of that gluttony, right? You're rolling your own muck forever, right? Same for sloth, right? We're pretty hardcore, right? That's a pretty crappy way to live out the rest of eternity.
I think it's kind of like, I mean, it's just a reflection of how he, like how you reap what you sow. Isn't that in the Bible? Like you reap what you sow. And it's like, if you don't, you know, if you don't, be productive, eat healthy, get up early, you won't reap you'll reap the benefits of like what you put out into the world. So it's like if you don't try to be like you said, like sloth and stuff, like I don't know, if you're lazy, then you're just kind of gonna be living in your own filth, or if you're gluttonous, I don't know, something along those lines.
Right? Reap what you sow. And are you saying then that's a just punishment for that sin, to roll in your own muck forever?
I'm not saying that I think it's a just punishment, but I think that's what Dante thought was a just punishment. Like maybe yeah.
Yeah, I asked that question because that'll actually be a future essay question that I'll give you guys. Like, so like what is pick a sin? Do you think the punishment's just? That'll be a future essay question. You guys will get at some point.
When I think of like how that's like he puts on there, I think of that movie Seven. How I don't know if you guys have watched it. Have you watched Seven? It's got I think Brad Pitt in it. And it's like they commit sins and he puts on like the killer, like one I think was lust, and he like whatever sin they committed, that's how he kind of like killed them. So that's how I kind of like think he's putting him in hell, kind of like that.
I saw that. I was actually thinking of that movie Seven while they were talking just a minute ago. And the one for gluttony, if I remember correctly, because it's been a long time since I've seen that, I think he actually like chains a guy to a table, and then he just forces him to keep eating and eating and eating until, he eventually just, eats until he, I think, kind of, kills himself, or stomach explodes, or just, like busts, or just whatever. But kind of like even going back to like talking about lust and how they were, punished by like the winds, blowing and everything like that. And if it was constantly blowing, I would imagine that there was like very little like peace or rest or anything like that for them. So even for lust, even though it was a I guess like the lesser of the sins, that was something, how it was constantly or violently blowing, for them to, lust, even though some people, a lot of people that I guess that are lustful, they don't have to act on it, but, in their hearts, in their minds, they're still lustful. And, to not have that peace and rest, to constantly be kind of like what Aaliyah was saying was, it's kind of like, you make your bed, you lay in it, you kind of reap what you sow. With doing that, it was constantly in their mind. So now they're not able to rest, or they're not able to have any peace, because, they constantly are fighting against this wind, because that's what they were always doing. Like in their mind, there was constantly something that was, keeping their focus somewhere else. And then like with the gluttony, having to kind of like rot away, or like being like their own, muck, or I think is what you all said, but because they were I guess making like the bad choices of that. And then kind of like the same thing, you make your bed, you lay in it, or you reap what you sow. The making bad choices as far as like the bad foods and treating your body that way and doing all that. So it's kind of like if you take in all this stuff that's bad for you, that keeps weighing you down and keeps making you sick. A lot of times it can make people sick, or make all this stuff that's going on. It's kind of like you're causing your own body, like on the inside, and I guess metaphoric terms, to kind of rot away, because you're doing all these bad things to it. So then that's kind of like your hell. That's kind of like or that's how I read, like like what Dante said, like not necessarily saying I'm, like what Aaliyah said, I'm not saying it's a just punishment, but that's what I read from him, like reading through the different punishments and the different circles, what the punishment was.
Yeah, I agree with Stacy. Like, because as he would descend down, like through each ring, Virgil would kind of be like, oh, these people are in this ring, and he would, and on some rings he would kind of give an explanation as to why, the logic behind why they are here where they are.
Right. There is some weird, twisted logic in all of these, right? I agree with Stacy here too, right? And it does seem just, all these do seem almost poetic in some way, right? That's the punishment, like the wind says, she very well stated very well there, right? That seems like an apt punishment for lust. The angry people are always angry. They're always like biting and gnawing and tearing at each other, right? Was you gonna say something, Nathan?
Yeah, it being Dante's story, and his account and the way he feels, maybe he's got something that somebody gluttonous did to him, whether it was take food out of his mouth or his family's mouth or something at one time, and maybe that's where he wants to rank them, just because of a personal preference, not so much just for the people in general, but it being his story, it might just be, well, this is where the gluttonous people go because they're worse than the lustful people because they did this to me or somebody I knew.
Yeah, Dante's life, something I would like to read more about. Just to know like all the different people and how they made him mad or what have you.
And maybe it's like, I think it was Aaliyah that said at the beginning of class, like, just kind of wondering if maybe it was like, maybe because it did kind of seem like it was kind of like a dream, that he had, like this was, and I know like a lot of times now, if there's something, well, I know for me, I don't know, how you all dream, but like if there's something that you're worried about or something that is, constantly on your mind or something that, maybe you're focusing so much on, I mean, I don't know if you all do, but I mean, I'll dream about that sometimes, or sometimes that'll, like mess with me, or if there's something that I'm worried about or something like that. So, maybe for him, how we're talking about maybe because of the Greeks, maybe because he felt that way, maybe there was something that was really, kind of like gnawing on him, or that really kind of had him or gripped him, even with him being, like his own kind of artist or poet. Maybe, he was even reflecting on himself in some of these ways. But I think it might have been, I think it was Aaliyah that had mentioned that at the beginning of class.
This would be a good interesting assignment to give you guys. Like, how would you guys rank these sins, right? I think that based on your own personal preferences, I think that would be a fun essay assignment. Which one would you rank the worst, right? Or the least? Yeah, I wanted to, in the little bit of time we got, I wanted to mention the money lender part, the Seminists. Did want to bring those up because this is an important concept that we're going to see through the whole rest of the class. This one's in Canto 11. They mention them there. They're talked about more later, but they're mentioned here in Canto 11. Around the line 60 in Canto 11, they say they're kind of classifying all these groups together: hypocrites, flatterers, dabblers in sorcery, falsifiers, thieves, and Seminists. Panderers, seducers, grafters, and like filth. The former kind of fraud both disregards the love nature enjoys and that extra bond between men which creates a special trust. I did want to bring this up because it is very important, but oftentimes the sin of simony, things like money lending, right? In the Western world, especially in the Middle Ages, especially the sin of money lending and drawing interest and kind of benefiting off of people beyond, based on this imaginary concept of interest. This type of thing has oftentimes been associated with Jewish people. All right, this is a stigma that goes way back into the Middle Ages. Oftentimes Jewish people were associated with the sin of money lending. Lots of times these Jewish people were more wealthy merchants. Right? They would give them loans, have compound interest. And there was a lot of anger. There's always been a lot of anger associated with Jewish people in that regard. Dante doesn't point them out as being Jews here. I'm just pointing out the historical fact here, right? But we are going to run into a lot of anti-Semitism as the class goes on. But a big reason for it, well, there's a lot of reasons for anti-Semitism, right? You know, the Jews have often been blamed for putting Christ to death, right? It was them who, even more than Pontius Pilate, right? It was them who led to his getting crucified. Right? So they've often been blamed for that. They've oftentimes been blamed too for taking advantage of the poor people, right? Giving them loans that they can't pay, that they'll never pay back because of interest and stuff. So depending on where you live in West Europe in the Middle Ages, sometimes Jews weren't even allowed in a country. Like in England, especially, like they would run Jews out of the country, right? Because they hated them that bad, because they were seen as being the money lenders out to rip people off, right? So that type of stigma still exists today. Right? If you ever hear any anti-Jewish sentiments, right? They'll say, well, a lot of the people in power, like especially in the financial institutions, a lot of these people are Jewish, right? So like Bloomberg in New York, for instance, right? That's a guy that they'll point to sometimes. So that's dangerous rhetoric. That's part of what the Germans used, right, in their anti-Jewish rhetoric, right? That caused the Holocaust, right? They said all of their problems with their economy in Germany was the Jews' fault, right? So the Jews and money go a long way back. So I did want to point this out because we are going to see it again in the class. I don't know. Do you guys have a thought on this? Like this long stigma or against the Jewish people for this type of thing? I wanted to educate you on it because, as I said, it's going to be something we keep encountering. But I'm curious to know if you guys have ever heard people say stuff like that or anything like that before.
I've heard of I've heard the stereotypes and stuff too. Like, obviously I don't agree with, but I mean, I don't know too much about it, but I'm familiar with people thinking that Jewish people necessarily are are really into real estate, etc. So.
Right. Yeah. That's that stereotype, right? Goes way back. Others of you heard stuff like this before? Maybe know your World War II history and know that's why Hitler blamed them for their problems and stuff. Yeah, it's completely irrational, right? I mean, there are a lot of Jewish people in power in those types of roles, right? That doesn't mean that you can lump them all together, right? It's being evil because of that reason. So I did want to draw your attention to that because, like I said, it is a sentiment we're going to keep seeing. We'll see it next week with Chaucer. So pretty good read this week, right? You guys all got into it. This is always one of the most popular reads I do in this class. Everybody loves Dante. So if you're curious, read the rest of the thing that I didn't assign, right? If you guys want to go to read or yeah, I would encourage it. It's never been made into a film that I know of. That's an interesting one more thing I'd like to point out. Like, could you get away with making this into a film? Probably no studio would go near it, right? Because they know it would probably tick a lot of people off. Right? So that's probably why we've never seen it on a film or a mini series or something. That's me speculating. Right? But I can imagine nobody would want to go near making a movie on this. They did make a video game, Dante's Inferno, a video game. And it was really silly, right? Dante, in that game, Dante pretty much just goes through hell and kills everything he sees, right? So it's a good time, but it has nothing to do with the book. So I played it myself. Final thoughts.
Yeah, the only thing, which like the movie, I don't even remember what year it came out, but I think it was Kashina that mentioned it too. The movie Seven with Brad Pitt, and that has, like the 7 deadly sins, and it goes through, which it's all based on, like, the plot twist of a murder and different things like that. So they go through, and he, has all these different people. But to go through and actually do something like this with Dante and stuff, I would say it would be strange now, because that movie, it's, quite a few years old. But when you mentioned that about the Jews, I don't remember ever hearing like that reference. I know when reading about that, and like how, charging interest or charging different things, beyond like what the person can pay back, or lending money with it, like these crazy interest or this crazy, amounts or stipulations that, when the person can't pay back. For me, I had not heard about it for the Jews, but some of the things that kind of, I guess, like some of the people, like in different movies or different things to compare that to. I know, like everybody, like around Christmas time, like Scrooge, everybody, knows that whole story, and the many different movies and stories that are made with that, and how he is, about different things and charging different things. And I guess Potter in It's a Wonderful Life, people like that are, I guess they lend stuff, but it's at a cost, or they lend stuff, like that. But I had never heard that reference, not like that about the Jews though. But I thought like a lot of the circles, just, some of the different things, like, anger. I think we just mentioned that briefly, like, somebody, that's anger, and then kind of like their hell, or, what they had in their circle, they just the fighting, the biting, like all the time, like it's just constant, like that's what theirs is. So there was some of the circles that, that you would read, and I was kind of like, like thinking like that's what the punishment is. But then there was some of them that I read, and it, I guess, almost made sense that that's what the punishment would be, just from, me reading and my take on it.
Some of the circles get punished pretty hard. Like we didn't talk about the suicide section, but the suicides really get punished badly. We didn't dive into that in our time. But yeah, it's interesting. You hadn't heard that before about the Jews, Stacy. Besides being money lenders, they're also oftentimes associated with being miserly, like they don't want to spend their money. I think that's another negative stereotype against them too. We have the miserly in here as well, so those are two sins that are often associated with them that are here in the Inferno.
Wouldn't that be considered like greed? You'd rather like hold on and take more, but hold on and keep holding on, but want more and more and more.
Right. Yeah. Keep accumulating it, but never spend it. Just keep it to yourself, right?
I'll tell you something about Jewish people that I've noticed and knew a guy very well is a lot of times you can't, they're not liked because, of their money situation they have, but you can't sway them one way or the other. And they are very, very family oriented. Like everything they do is based upon making sure that the next generation has what they have. And, the loan and money that goes back as far as it did, is that's why they have the money they have, and they still, and they're really profitable businessmen in most instances. One more thing real quick. If you're into the Dante's Inferno thing and you have the chance, there's I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's the house that Jack built. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not. I think it was 17 or 18. There was it's like a mini series. I think it's on Netflix, but it shows it's really gory and bad. So don't watch it if you don't like scary stuff. But Matt Dillon was in it, and he goes through the night. He's a murderer that kills many people, but it goes through the 9 circles of hell. It's very loosely based on it, but you can tell it's really, when I watched it the first time, I had no idea that's what it was about until you see it. And it's actually, it's really, if you get a chance to watch it, just if you're interested, it's really good. It's loosely based on Dante's Inferno, and you can tell a lot of the stuff that's similar.
That's a good recommendation. I got 2 good recommendations, 7 and that now. So it's a house that Jack built. I'll check it out. It's on Netflix, you said?
It was when I watched it. Yeah, it may be on something else now, but it's actually pretty good. And Matt Dillon, I like him, so it was pretty good.
Very cool. But there was some other horror movie that came out a couple of years ago where like they go underneath the catacombs in Paris or something. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about. It's one of those found footage movies where they're like carrying a camera around. You guys know what I'm talking about. There was one of those that was loosely based on Dante's Inferno too, because they actually go down into hell through the Paris catacombs. They come out on the other end of the earth at the end. What was it? It's going to kill me. I'll have to Google it real quick. Paris catacomb. As above, so below. That was the name of that movie. As above, so below. Did you see that one, Nathan? You remember it?
Yeah, I watched that one. It's kind of like a Blair Witch type of movie, but I remember it. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very loosely based on Dante too. So 3 recommendations for you all, I think, for the weekend to get bored. So. All right, so next week we'll do the Canterbury Tales. So for the early week response, you're going to read the prologue to it. The prologue. Then for Zoom next week, we will do the Wife of Bath's tale. It's basically what the Canterbury Tales is. All these people get together, they go on a pilgrimage, and all these different people tell their own different stories. So we're going to read the story from the character called the Wife of Bath. So the prologue, you'll read about all the different types of characters who were going on this pilgrimage. And So then you'll get this character's story. So if you're interested in, next week's going to be a hardcore kind of like feminist day, right? We're going to talk a lot about gender roles and feminism and early feminism and stuff like that next week. So just to give you a preview, that's what we're doing next week. Okay, great story. So all that's in the book. All that's in our book. So we'll see you guys then. Enjoy your weekend. It's a great class. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Too.
Have a good weekend.
See you,
Bye.
Kachin.
Have a good weekend.
See you.
Bye.